The State of the World by Serving. And if you Google lead by serving, you get, I think, 200 million hits. If you Google ethics, you get 300 and something million hits. If you Google servant leadership, presently you get 60 million hits. But as I mentioned before, 18 months ago, you had 5 million hits. So this is something that is very much, I don't want to call it in vogue, but people like it. They say this is the solution. There's a history behind this in the United States. In 1971, there was an author that wrote a book for politicians. And he said, I'm concerned about where politicians are going in their leadership style. Another person wrote a book for a different reason, coming off of his. Then another fellow came along. He wrote a book just for professors in universities and colleges. And in his book, he said, it's all about charisma. It's got nothing to do with virtue or morality. And that was used for 35 years. And a very famous researcher in servant leadership debunked that at a world level about 8 or 10 years ago. And so now we have research going on, a lot of things, great things going on. So in the Greenleaf Scholars is one of the areas. If you are in the academic world, you want to, your pre or post PhD, annually there is an invite to submit a proposal and become a scholar. It's vetted. It's a academic kind of vetting. Just like they have in the art museum, they vet art. Here they're vetting servant leaders. Does it have elements of the best test? Everything we have in the summit that's coming up in June, all 111 sessions have all been vetted by one of our volunteers here who has a master's in servant leadership for the best test. And that's how they determined who was going to be able to offer. And depending upon what you're interested will determine what becomes available to you. Another thing that's happening, is at the University of Missouri, they have a PhD for educators, administrators they sometimes call them in the United States, and they are combining servant leadership and character education. The first session was June 23rd, 2019, and we had the opportunity of kicking that off with them. It's now 2 years, and the results are very good, and they are marked. They're marketable. They're marked in the sense that it's adding another dimension. Jim Lamone and Bloom just came out with something a year ago that's really profound. If you click on that URL, you will be able to get it. It will tell you what's going on in the world in this area. Leiden is the one that had this international paper with all 4 of these academics that debunked the fellow that said it's nothing to do with virtue, nothing to do with values or morals. And the response of that author was, well, you can do whatever you want. And he kind of stuck by his book, but it's all gone. One servant leader chair in Wisconsin, with the first Wisconsin for 10 years, they came up with a grid that allowed their leadership programs, 33 colleges, to incorporate the tenets of that. And that has been shared with the top 10 universities, which I think is 13 now in the United States, and they are integrating what they've learned, exchanging information. Rich things going. And the people coming out of school in the future will have a different perception and a different way of looking at things as opposed to what they were taught. Leadership comparisons, Dr. Robert Leiden, that's a good one to use. WisconsinServantLeadership.org. There are almost 200 videos of Wisconsin stories, the stories that you just heard here, that we've generated over the last 10 years. Know that on December 1, Jim Lamone will be presenting his view of servant leadership, the myths of servant leadership, and on January 5th, Dr. Jeff Thompson, he will be presenting how to build a servant organization to thrive in chaos. These are free. This is an attempt to keep everybody busy, engaged with our our movement for next June and the bridge between last June and next June. Please take advantage of this. They've been well received. Tom, I'm going to let you close.
Thank you, Dick. Well, how do we do? Do you feel uplifted? Do you have a sense of gratitude and hope? My favorite commercial for years goes like this. Hello, my name's Tom Bodette from Motel 6. Then Tom Bodette goes on for 25 seconds explaining all the reasons as to why you might want to stay in a new and improved Motel 6. But that last line's a dandy, isn't it? Remember, we'll keep the light on for you. I don't know where you're living right now, but I would imagine that there's pockets of darkness, a little bit of despair going on right now. People wondering, is there a way out? What's the task of servant leaders? Let's keep the light on. Let's be witnesses to hope, people of courage who believe in the goodness of others serving a greater good. And finally, a story from Parker Palmer, who had spent a retreat about 5 years ago with John Lewis, going to different civil rights sites in the South. And he's on a bus with John, and John recounts the story of being beat up with a baseball bat. He and a friend of his were trying to register people for voting. And they were sent to the hospital. They were beat up by 3 young white men with baseball bats. It was a terrible beating, but they survived. John Lewis goes on and, of course, is elected to Congress. And one day, as he's sitting in his office, the door is knocked on and he welcomes people in, and a gentleman comes in about John's age, and he had his son with him, who's in his 40s. And the man gets down on his knees and says, Congressman Lewis, I was one of the men who beat you with a baseball bat. Could you ever forgive me? And John Lewis looked at that man on his knees in tears with his son looking on. And John went over and raised the man up and looked into his eyes and wiped away the tears. And he said, yes, I forgive you. John Lewis said to Parker Palmer and everybody else that day, never forget, hearts can change. This is the hope, the courage, the determination, and intentionality of servant leadership. Not changing situations, but changing human hearts, starting with ourselves, embracing the understanding that service is love made visible. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your presence and participation. Look forward to seeing you on Zoom sometime in the future. Peace.